So it was too tall for me to get up on the hood, so I kept going. I turned and ran, and I heard screeching of tires behind me, and barely getting out of the way, and ended up on the street. And so I walk up to him and they take one big step back, and then they weren't interested in who I was. And I'm not sure if you all have ever been mesmerized before, but I couldn't talk. And they asked me what my name was. I couldn't talk. And they asked me how old I was, and I held up 6 fingers. And then they asked me if I knew who they were. And I said, of course I know who you guys are. Everybody knows who you guys are. And so they asked me if I was sure. And I looked at each one of them. I looked at all 3 of them together, and I said, yeah, I know who you are. And they said, well, prove to us that you know who we are. And so I looked at John straight in the eye, and I sang, I love you, yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, they started laughing. They thought that was the most hilarious thing. So they were concerned. John turns to Ringo and he says, you know, he sings better than you, Ring. Then he turns back to me and he says, do you play drums? And of course I wanted to be the 5th Beatle, so I lied and told him that I could play drums. And they asked me if I was proud of being an American, and I told them that I was. And they asked me what I thought about the Vietnam War, and I really didn't have an answer for them because up until that point I really trusted my government. And John marveled at the fact that I was in the park by myself. He's asking me where my mother was. How can you be in the park by yourself? If you want to go to the park whenever you want, then you're going to have to be an artist. Otherwise, you're going to have a real job. And he gave me a acting lesson. He told me to assume the role of the character and just do whatever that character was going to do, and that follow the instructions of the director. George indicated that he needed to get moving home to his sister's house in San Francisco because he was worried about his wife. He knew that she wasn't going to notice that he was gone, but she might not recognize somebody who was claiming to be him. They were heading on their way to San Francisco to check out the Haight. They asked me if I knew which way San Francisco was, and I pointed towards the south. And they wanted to know if I knew where London was, and I pointed towards the east. And they said that the shorter route to London was over the Arctic, and that a more northerly tangent was more accurate. So I asked him why he hadn't brought his wife along. And, you know, how could you be married to somebody who was not a good friend that you wouldn't like to hang out with? And they asked about my parents' relationship and whether they were friendly, and I said, they're friendly. And I really couldn't get over the concept of being married to somebody that you were not friends with. And John asked me if I knew where babies came from. And I told him that I did. And Ringo asked if it was the stork, and I kind of looked at him like, oh my gosh, am I going to have to explain sexual reproduction to an adult? And at that point I asked him if where the fourth one was.